So my name is Carrie Marcinkevich. I'm from Penn State University. I'm a member of the Higher Education Advisory Council, and I'm your moderator for this session. We are excited to welcome you here, and we will be learning about Salesforce org structure from Kyla Farroll from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. During her session, I will be monitoring the chat. And please go ahead and use the chat and ask questions and Q&A over on the right-hand side of the screen. And we will finish and answer those questions at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn it over to Kyla.
Thank you, Carrie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session, and thank you so much for attending. As Carrie said, my name is Kyla Farroll, and I am the Associate Director of Enterprise CRM and Engagement Solutions for UW-Madison. Now, I'm not going to cover a lot on this slide because it would be a little bit of a giveaway. I'm going to be talking about some of this content during the presentation. But a couple things that I do want to just call out is our future enterprise use cases for CRM rollout. We're looking at doing a lot of different things at UW-Madison with Salesforce, such as admissions, advancement, doing some faculty professional development, and learner success. And while that's a really broad term, it really relates to all of those interactions and touch points that we're having with our learners from the time that they start school until the time that they graduate. One other thing I'll point out here is something that people always want to know is, what is your student information system? We are a PeopleSoft school. So today we're going to talk about the single org versus multi-org dilemma. And I'm going to go through quite a bit of background before we touch that topic, because I really think you need to have that context so that you understand what it is that we're trying to do, where we're coming from, and the decisions that we made and what our future vision looks like. Then we're going to get into that enterprise CRM strategy, and that's where we will really dive into some of the specifics about single org versus multi-org. Then we're going to take a look at looking ahead and some of our future projects on our roadmap. So let's start with the background. And the first thing is, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about UW-Madison. We are a research institution and part of the Big Ten Conference. And as of this last fall, we had almost 48,000 learners. And I use that term learner because we're not talking about just our undergraduate and graduate students. We're also talking about our non-credit and professional degree and certificate students. In addition to that, as well, from our last annual report, we had just over 24,000 faculty and staff and almost 460,000 living alumni. In addition to that, we have hundreds of thousands of people that we are working with throughout the state of Wisconsin with community organization, different people across the United States as well as globally. And I'm bringing up these large numbers because all of these people are the constituents that we are serving and that we want to have those relationships with. So when you think about these numbers, you can see why it's really essential that we have a CRM at UW-Madison. So where did it all start with Salesforce at UW? Well, it started with the Office of Admissions and Recruitment and the Division of Continuing Studies. And we had some visionaries that came together from those two departments. And although they had very different goals, very different processes, they knew that with the power and scalability of Salesforce, they could have all of their needs met in a single Salesforce org. And one of the visionaries in this group from the Division of Continuing Studies is Alan Ng. He's one of our biggest champions of Salesforce on campus. And he really put it well by saying the education landscape is becoming more competitive and student expectations are changing. That is true now more than ever. When we think about the current environment through with the pandemic, and even from what we heard on our keynote, this is more true than ever. So we've seen a lot of really good success from 2018. An example of that is in the first couple of years, we saw a 10% year-over-year growth in our first year classes. So that success combined with this visionary approach to what we need to do with our students really started to grow the interest across campus. And it even went all the way up to some of our leadership. They were really getting on board with how do we adjust what we are doing to meet the students' needs and their expectations. So if we take this up a notch and think about it from that strategic vision level, we can look at the evolution of what we talk about when we say OneBadger. Now, OneBadger is not a technology. It's an aspirational, overarching strategy. It is broad and far-reaching. It's designed to describe the modern digital experience and the associated supporting capabilities that can provide an intellectual home to the Wisconsin community and top minds globally. So we've got a lot of folks on campus, a lot of our stakeholders and some of our leadership that are really bought into this. They get it and they understand it. So now if we think about taking that strategic vision and kind of coming down a notch back to that technology level, how do we enable that? And what does a seamless enterprise OneBadger CRM experience? Well, a couple of things is, one, we want to provide a 360-degree circle of support. It may have even been Alan, who I mentioned earlier, that coined that phrase. And I know we talk a lot about the 360-degree view of the student, but we also want to have that seamless support experience for our students. And that really goes into those cohesive engagements across touch points. We need to collaborate across the schools and colleges and all of our divisions so that we've got that seamless, personalized experience for our learners. But it goes beyond learners too. We want to have that lifelong connection with all of the UW-Madison constituents. So these may be the people who are going to school at UW-Madison, but also those folks in the community and the businesses that we collaborate with. So we really want to be able to meet all of those constituent needs with our OneBadger CRM. So we talked about, how it started in 2018. Well, now how it's going in 2022. We officially have the OneBadger CRM initiative up and running, and prospect management, recruitment, and marketing automation is going strong. We've also got a Salesforce org for external relations, contact, and relationship management. We've also built a custom solution. We call it clinical placement, but really think about it as an alignment between students and school districts for our students who need to do student teacher placement. And then in the last 18 months, we've also had a really big focus on supporting the university with some COVID-19 related support, such as our residential students needing to go into isolation or quarantine if they've been impacted by COVID, and then also supporting campus-wide testing compliance. Now, I bring that up even though it's temporary, and we all hope it's temporary. That won't be an ongoing enterprise OneBadger CRM solution, but it really has taken up the enterprise team's time over the last 18 months. So it's certainly worth mentioning. But we're going strong so far. We've got over 400 users across 50 departments. So we are really, really pleased with the progress that we've made. But are we meeting that OneBadger strategic vision? And what are the goals of OneBadger? Well, they are to improve institutional effectiveness, enable collaboration across colleges, schools, divisions, departments, and institutes, provide that unified relationship management, and deliver actionable insights through data analysis. So we've got these separate orgs and we're meeting a lot of constituent and stakeholder needs, but we're really not fulfilling these goals quite yet. And we need some direction. How do we get to that OneBadger vision? How do we enable that collaboration, that sharing of data across all of our different currently siloed units, including our schools and colleges? So what is our direction? Which way do we go? Because we know there's a lot of directions that we can go. So this is what leads to an enterprise CRM strategy. We really need to think about this broadly from that OneBadger vision and figure out how do we enable that. Well, we needed expert support to help us do that. So we partnered with Huron to do a strategy engagement, and they were extremely helpful to help us with roadmap phasing, what a timeline might look like, the type of staffing that we need, the associated costs with different projects. What is that Salesforce platform strategy, the org strategy, which we're about to talk about in a minute. They also helped us look at application lifecycle management and some recommendations on change management and governance, because when you have an enterprise CRM strategy, these are very, very important aspects of really rolling this out campus-wide. So for a handful of months, they went through all of our documentation. They did a technical analysis. They did org health evaluation on our existing orgs, and they even conducted a visioning survey amongst our stakeholders. They uncovered 66 different systems and applications that we need to consider when it comes to integrating with our orgs. And they interviewed 131 stakeholders across 45 different schools, colleges, and divisions. And guess what they heard? The same thing that we have been talking about since 2018. It's a long journey for students. We need clean, accurate, and up-to-date data to serve the student where they are. Many of our systems work well on their own, but they don't talk to each other. The data exists, but it's nearly impossible to get it all in one place. I don't think we're unique in this. I think a lot of you out there are probably experiencing the same thing. We've got all these different systems, and then within your schools, colleges, and divisions, they've got their databases, they've got spreadsheets. So we're still siloed, and all of our stakeholders, they really understand this. So how do we bring this together? How do we enable that collaboration and that unified data approach? So one of the ways to do that is to have an org strategy. And what Huron did is that they used this enterprise architecture operating model, and they evaluated the shared business processes and the shared business data. So we're going to start in the lower right quadrant with the replication. This one is a no right out of the gate, because you see right there, it says few, if any, shared customers. We have all shared customers. So really this replication of these siloed orgs and meeting the needs of, different constituents, that's not where we are. The next one is diversification. This is where we started and where we are today. And when we started, it worked fine, because when you think about who the constituents were with pre-enrollment, so your prospects and your recruits, they can be segmented, because we're really working with a lot of people that may not end up coming to UW. But we are growing out of that. We need to step away from diversification, and we really need to go into coordination. This is where we have our shared customers, our operationally unique business units or functions. This is really where we need to be. Excuse me. Now, another thing to consider with this, though, is that I've been with the university since 2020. And so a lot of these conversations started prior to me joining. And a number of those stakeholders really felt strongly about having a single org strategy with unification. So I do want to explore that a little bit so that we can look at multi-org versus single org. Excuse me, I have to take a drink for a minute. Excuse me. So multi-org versus, I am so sorry, everyone, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. So let's dive a bit deeper into multi-org versus single org. We have the coordination model versus the unification model. Now you'll see I listed these as green, yellow, and red, and I did it kind of jokingly with yep, kind of, sorta, and nope. The reason why I did that is because, so sorry, you really have to have some context behind these different questions. And honestly, depending on that context, you might answer yes or no to the question. For example, under coordination, impact on other business unit transactions. Well, this is a yes in some cases, but a no in other cases, because we are such a large, diverse, and siloed, decentralized university. But when you really line up these two particular options, you can see under unification, we do have some pretty distinct no's there. For one thing, it requires a centralized management with functional, process, and business unit matrices, and also high-level process owner design and standardized processes. Now, we would probably love to get to that point, but honestly, with our size and with the fact that we are decentralized, and we actually take pride in that because we want to continue operating that way in some circumstances, this is just likely not going to happen. So when it comes to thinking about having that single org, the standardized business processes across all of our business units, it's likely not a realistic expectation. So we're really leaning towards this multi-org coordination model. There are some additional factors here too. The speed of implementations, enhancements, and onboarding. We also had some concerns that if we have a single org, how long do we have to wait when we have this massive backlog to be able to push enhancements into a single org? We'd also like to have some expanded technical limitations, because if you have a single org, you're within just those technical limitations, whereas if you have multiple orgs, you basically are multiplying your limitations by that many in a good way. Domain data and user alignment. We don't need the student data for external relations, for example. So that was another consideration, is data in orgs. And then also capability alignment. We may come up with a use case for opportunities for current. Don't really have one right now, but yet opportunities are great for pre-enrollment and for external relations. So those were just some of the additional factors that made us land on the coordination model, which is a multi-org strategy. So that's great. So we've landed on multi-org, right? Well, what does multi-org look like at a campus our size? I've already talked about the fact that we've got those 4 orgs that we've already got up and running, right? Well, what if each school and college and division wants their own org? Are we going to end up with all of these orgs all across campus? Talking with a colleague and friend recently, she aligned this with being on the Oprah show. You know, you get an org and you get an org and everybody gets an org. And we're not doing that. We don't want to end up with 30 or 40 orgs that we're managing. We want to be able to really segment this and really make the most of our work and our CRM. So these are the drawbacks for us for a full multi-org approach. And I labeled this slide very carefully because I know many of you out there may have multi-orgs at your institution and they might work for you. But for us, these are the drawbacks. Our orgs and the data would continue to be siloed, and that is not what we want. Remember, when we're talking about OneBadger, this is the seamless experience. This is collaboration. We don't want those silos. Or we're going to have to integrate, integrate all of those orgs. And we don't want to have to do that either. We also don't want to implement the same capabilities over and over again. If we would consider an org per school or college, they might all need case management. We're literally going to be building the same thing over and over again. We really don't want to have to do that either. This would also probably lead to decentralized staffing. And one of the things that we would really like to have is more of a community of practice. So we'd really like to have all of our Salesforce administrators and business analysts really working together. They don't necessarily have to be in the same department, but we want those dotted lines and we want that collaboration. And if we have 20, 30 plus orgs, that might be a challenge. We're not going to have the collaboration across divisions if people are still operating separately. And this could lead to a disjointed process for our constituents. And we're back to that inconsistent data, especially if we do not have these orgs integrated. That's a poor user experience, and we don't want that. So where we've landed is a hybrid approach, and this is what Huron has recommended for us, and this is what we're driving towards. It is a domain-driven, integrated, multi-org approach. Now, if you think back to the orgs that we already have, we've got pre-enrollment already. This is going to be our enterprise recruiting and admissions environment for all of our learners, both credit and non-credit. We've got learner success. Remember, we've got that clinical placement solution, which is for current students. So now we can have this learner success model, which takes our students from that pre-enrollment time frame, maybe from the time they matriculate all the way through graduation. This is where we can provide student services, different types of advising, and all kinds of support. Then we'll have external relations. That one also already exists today. And this is where we're going to have those non-learner use cases. So not only working with our businesses and our community organizations, but really anything non-learner. So even our faculty professional development, we would want to have that there. But when you think about this multi-org domain-driven approach, you really need something to anchor it. You need something to tie all of these things together. And that is a fourth org, which we would call a CIAM hub, which is Constituent Identity and Access Management. This is going to be the source of truth for our constituent identity. It's where users can control their own person domain data. And these records would be able to reflect all of the relationships that single contact, that single constituent has with the university. So here's what this would look like in the future. And this is a simplistic diagram of this, obviously. But we're very fortunate that some of the other initiatives within the Division of IT chose Salesforce as their constituent identity and access management solution. So our future state would be to have Experience Cloud as that user interface for profile. So any of our constituents that have accounts, quote unquote, with UW-Madison can update their personal and demographic information. They can specify their pronouns. They'll be able to also establish their preferences with that. So all of these records would be in the CIAM hub. These are all of the contact records. And then those sync up with our orgs. So if we have an individual who maybe they attended the university and have an undergraduate degree, so they're considered an alum, maybe they have applied to the graduate school, so they're now an applicant. They're also taking a non-credit certificate program, and perhaps they're on the board of directors for the Humane Society or something. We can see all of that with the affiliations and the relationships on the contact record, and we want to have all of that synced up. So this is our future state. One contact record per constituent, seeing all of those relationships. It's going to contain the most up-to-date information. There are some things to work through, though. We've got some governance and privacy rules that we need to sort through. And just to be clear, this is not an MDM solution, master data management. This is just a way for us to leverage the work that's being done with a new CIAM solution. So let's talk a bit about the benefits of a domain-driven org. And I touched on these a little bit already, though, but fewer orgs to integrate together. The relevant data is going to now be shared across orgs. So that includes contact data or anything that might be relevant for a student who's graduating that external relations might want to see as an alum. Data visualization across fewer orgs. We want to take advantage of things like Salesforce Connect, where we can visualize data versus passing data back and forth. Some of the capabilities might be domain specific. We'll have that centralized staffing. So we've got the fewer orgs. We might still need a number of admins for each org, but by having just the fewer orgs, we can really kind of build that community of practice a bit better. We've got the ability now for staff and faculty to collaborate because they're going to be in the same org, can send tasks back and forth, can talk and chatter. And this should be a seamless process for our constituents, which also means a great constituent experience because we've now got consistent data for them. So let's take a few minutes to look ahead. We've got both challenges and opportunities. So first, let's just be clear, the challenge, the architecture puzzle for all of this. We've got multiple domain-driven CRMs, but we've also got Experience Cloud, using that for profile. Experience Cloud is a one-to-one when it comes to Experience Cloud in an org. It's not Experience Cloud one-to-many Salesforce orgs. So what does that look like if we want to use Experience Cloud as portals for other things beyond profile? We need to really figure out what that looks like. There's still a lot of work to do with the CIM org. There's a lot to that particular solution. There's a lot of other integrations. There's data governance considerations. So we're still a long way out from really being able to have that up and running and being able to utilize the data that it's going to give us. We've got to consider those constituent user interfaces. That ties back to Experience Cloud. We've got to also look at what are our source systems? Where is all the data coming from that's going to be feeding into these orgs? And that includes our ancillary systems and databases. We want to also talk about things like data warehouse, data analytics. How does all of that factor into this? And then I have two final things on here that aren't quite architecture, but they kind of are. Licensing. Let's face it, we all know that Salesforce licensing can be a challenge. And so how do we do that? What about those use cases where an individual spans across two different orgs? Do we want to have dual licensing? We really don't. And then data governance too. We've just got to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that we've got our security and our data governance worked out so that we don't have any concerns about the wrong people seeing the wrong information. Now, moving forward, these are our opportunities, some things that we can move forward with now as we are figuring out some of these bigger pieces. We can go ahead and get these orgs integrated for some of our existing use cases. We also want to continue to build out those use cases that we know could really be used across the enterprise, across the entire university. A great example of that is case management for learner success. If we get that stood up in learner success for one group, all we have to do is build on it from there. Different categories, different types, different routing. So it's really going to enable us to get more groups up and running on something that a lot of different organizations across campus can use. We have marketing automation integration already now with pre-enrollment, but we also want to enable that with our other orgs. And we also want the ability to onboard basic CRM use cases, because even though we've got these big organizations across campus, like our schools, colleges, and divisions, we've also got these little bitty units that just don't have a lot of funding. But if we have basic contact and relationship management functionality and the data already in there, all we have to do is onboard them. They can take advantage of platform licensing. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We have project after project, on the horizon. So I'm going to end with this. If trailblazing was easy, the road would be paved. So there's not one single answer for single org versus multi-org. They're all going to have challenges. They're all going to have pros and cons. But this is what we do. This is what we do as higher ed Salesforce trailblazers. We figure things out. We're not afraid to take on the challenges, and we're going to do this. So thank you so much for attending my session. Apologize for the coughing. But if you want to connect with me, please feel free to reach out. If you have questions, if you want to give me any feedback, you can email me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. You can message me in the Trailblazer community. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you.
Kyla, thank you so very much. So let's take some questions. We have quite a few questions over in the Q&A. And to tee this one up, let's start with, So you have 4 orgs primarily, that's your starting structure. How do you decide if you need to add an additional org?
Oh, okay. That's a really good question. And I have already wondered that myself. I think as we start to architect and then really dive into these specific use cases that we have, because I mean, I think we probably have over 100 right now. We may find that we want to start and group those and maybe come up with another org. I'll give you one example, might be facility management. I know our Office of Facility Planning and Management has some interest in Salesforce. We've already got another little org it's not really considered part of this OneBadger CRM, and it is strictly to manage our biotechnology centers. We might want to do another org that way, but it's just something that we're going to evaluate down the road, but this is going to be our starting point.
And related to that, I would imagine, so I'm sure you have 100 folks knocking at your door. How do you move forward without biting off too much?
Oh, we've already bit off too much.
That's too late. That ship sailed.
Yeah, it's I mean, right now we have a very small team, and so really we can only handle as much as we can handle. The cases have had to be prioritized by sense of urgency, and that's why I brought up the COVID-19 related work that we've been doing, because that is the most urgent need on campus. So that's what we've been working with. At this point, it's really about what our team has the bandwidth to handle. But then also, if we have groups that come forward that have funding for a project, we're willing to hire a partner to then go into one of our orgs and start some of that build out. And that's what we're actually looking at right now, is some of those funded project opportunities.
Okay, so partnerships and additional funding, and a question about what is the staffing structure to support the orgs that you have now?
So it's very lean. At this point, we have 2 developers who also act as admins, and then an admin who is also in a dual role. He is both admin and business analyst. We have a marketing automation manager and a marketing automation administrator, and we're hiring a third. And so the goal is really to grow this team. And I can't reinforce enough the importance of growing that business analyst function, because a solid Salesforce BA also has admin training. And we really find that we need that process. We need those requirements uncovered and to really map out those processes that someone in that combined BA and admin role would have. I'll also just quickly mention that from an architecture perspective, we are looking at growing our team in that regard and maybe having a group approach to that. So in addition to the members of my team that I mentioned that are enterprise, we do have 3 admins that are solely dedicated to that pre-enrollment org. And by having those dotted lines and bringing these folks together, we can probably have them specialize in different areas where as a group, they can form that architect that we would need for the future.
Gotcha. Okay. You mentioned a couple of marketing automation roles in there. Can you talk about the marketing automation that you're using? And Greg's question is, how have you decided to layer marketing cloud instances into your 4-org strategy?
So we use Eloqua, and we've been using Eloqua. That is currently integrated with pre-enrollment. And in fact, I think Eloqua may have come first. And we are going to continue to use Eloqua for the next few years, and planning to integrate that with the other orgs. So I think there might be a little bit of rework that needs to be done to accommodate the other orgs in that current structure. But that is the plan, is to go ahead and get that integrated with those, because we do have a lot of people on campus that are using Eloqua and could really benefit from having those consistent contact records interact with Eloqua.
That's great. Okay, thanks. So talking about integrations, right? So pulling all that data in, what are you using in terms of tools to integrate the orgs?
We are using Informatica.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have that right now for our source systems, as well as some of those ancillary systems where we might just be pulling a report a week, and pushing it into the org. So Informatica is our go-to.
Okay. And Buyon's asking about, in that org strategy, how on a high level are you syncing contacts, students specifically, among the 4 orgs?
So that is an aspect of architecture that we still need to work out, and thinking about it in 2 different ways. One is that we want to move forward with this now. And so we're thinking that we may be leaning on the SIS data as our source of truth for that contact content, but then also making sure that however we move forward now and structure it, that when CIAM is fully up and running, we can just transition right to that, because that's going to be our source of truth. And that is also going to interact with SIS.
Okay, great. So one now, and then that when that's ready.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about saying this isn't really MDM. So could you talk about more detail around the contrast of this approach with true MDM?
Yeah, so I think we would say it's not MDM simply because we're not looking at it through that lens. It's more just to clarify that we need MDM, but we simply are not there yet. And talking about some of these principles of having that single contact record and that one record of truth, just not to be misunderstood with MDM. I think we need to have a broader plan for that to involve all of our data governance. We've got campus level data governance, and even incorporating maybe some other tooling to help us support MDM. So it's really just what we can do right now until we can figure out what an MDM approach might be.
Okay. And I think the last question we have time for is, what governance structure do you have to get adequate support from your business units?
Oh, okay. And it's funny, on that baseball card slide, which, so everybody knows, that's that intro slide, I didn't know what to put because I credit our pre-enrollment people. Those visionaries had governance, and they have done a great job at it. But as far as the rest of it, I know somebody had on their baseball slide, Wild Wild West. We're not there. We're just simply not there. And the thing is, governance is going to have to be established. It absolutely does. But then it's going to have to evolve, because the governance that we have right now, or that we would establish right now, would only be for these initial use cases. If we really take off, what is that going to look like a year from now? We might have several of our schools and colleges. We might have our entire student affairs division. So we need to come up with what is that going to look like now, but determine how it's going to evolve over time. And I think that's just going to take a little bit more stakeholder engagement, and maybe even an advisory committee to help us figure that out.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Kyla, you have done an absolutely amazing job. I know, as another big institution, org structure is a huge issue. So thank you very, very much for today. And thanks to everybody who has attended our session. Want to make sure you know there is plenty more content coming up. We are just getting started. So please head back to the main stage, visit our sponsor booths, and click on the agenda and find some more sessions today. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks, everyone.